You've probably heard of carbon credits. Well, what about biodiversity credits? The government this month said it's looking to support a voluntary biodiversity credit system to help fund the huge cost of restoring nature. That could be music to the ears of farmers and iwi wanting to do their bit for biodiversity, but facing the large expense of planting native forests or recreating wetlands. So what are biodiversity credits and how do they work? Sean Weaver is the chief executive of the firm Ecos, which announced its own scheme, BioCreditor, this week.
I wanted to develop a financing mechanism to enable community projects, landowners, larger projects to gain access to market-based financing, principally because there's just not enough money available in the grant funding world to do the biodiversity conservation that we need across the nation. And this is why markets are really valuable, because they're a larger source of money. But in order to get money from the private sector, you need to sell them something, and this is where biodiversity credits come in.
So what is a biodiversity credit?
So a biodiversity credit either represents a quantum of beneficial biodiversity change in an ecosystem that's measured, reported and verified, or it's a measure of biodiversity conservation output that will cause that change.
How much are these credits worth and who buys them?
Each project has to develop its own methodology for two things. First, the methodology for what the conservation management intervention is going to be. It might be invasive pest control, for example. It also has to develop a methodology for how it's going to measure the beneficial impact of that, but also measure how it's actually delivering that outcome. And what I'm describing here is the methodological foundations for our particular program, which is called BioCreditor. And we've developed that over the last 4 years, and we launched it this week. So we've built a standard called the Ecos SD standard, which defines all of the things you need to do in order to demonstrate the benefits that you're delivering. And then we've built a registry, a digital registry on blockchain technology, so that these units can be issued once they've been verified to the standard, and then they can be tracked and traced across the transactions in the market. Who would buy them? The private sector is discovering that there's an increasing need to demonstrate corporate social responsibility and good corporate citizenship as part of just doing business. And this includes environment, social and governance reporting, or nature-based financial disclosure reporting. And this can be a necessity sometimes for gaining access to markets or gaining access to capital, where capital providers like banks or investment funds might say to prospective investees, look, show us that you're looking after the planet as part of your proposal for capital raise, and then if you're performing in this way, we'll give you access to capital, or we might give you access to lower interest rates or something like that. Similarly, there's a lot of competition in markets, especially foreign markets, and showing responsible corporate citizenship is part of that puzzle. The voluntary carbon market plays a role there, but also the biodiversity markets are now starting to play a role there. So the first buyer from the first project that we've developed was a window manufacturer, and who liked the idea of selling biodiversity-enriched windows, where the biodiversity portion doesn't come from the window factory, because they can't do much biodiversity conservation in the factory, but they can support a nearby project, which is what they've done.
And that's the Sanctuary Maungatautari project?
Yes, Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari is the first project in the Ecos BioCreditor program, and it's gone through the entire process of project development, measurement, reporting, verification, credit issuance, and credit sales, and then revenue generation from those sales as a proof of concept for this market. Now we want to open it up, on the one hand, so that this first project can sell all of the credits that it's producing each year, and that we can then create enough demand to support many other projects.
So if a farmer or iwi wanted to recreate a wetland or plant more native forest, how much feasibly could they earn, and how often would they get paid if they got into biodiversity credits?
Yeah, so again, like farming, you've got to produce your farm products every year, and then you sell them every year to raise the revenue to cover the cost of annual production. And so the point of selling biodiversity credits is to generate revenue to cover the cost of biodiversity conservation management. So it's not about making money as such, it's about generating revenue to undertake a conservation activity that otherwise wouldn't happen because there's just not enough grant funding in the country to fund all of the biodiversity conservation that we want to do. And so that's the whole point. It's not really like a gold rush of, well, how much money can I make out of selling these things? Everybody in the value chain in our program has to make a profit, but nobody is allowed to make a super profit, like an unjustifiable super profit. And the main reason for that is that the end user of biodiversity credits is buying a conservation outcome, and they want to be confident that they're funding the true cost of looking after the place and not funding, somebody's super profit that will help them just buy another yacht. So it's essentially a fair trade market, the way that we've set this up. And what they make is really essentially what is the cost recovery required for that project. And if they sell all their units, then they will recover that cost, and then they can keep going as a form of sustainable financing. In a way, it's providing a farmer, in principle, with just another form of farming and a revenue stream to cover the cost of that form of farming on those parts of the farm that are probably better off farming biodiversity than farming beef or lamb, for example.
Sean Weaver of ECOS speaking to Sally Round. Sean mentioned Sanctuary Mountain, Maungatautari there. It's one of the pilot projects which the government is studying to see how biodiversity credits could work best for New Zealand and what sort of rules might be needed. To find out more, Sally popped into the Ministry for the Environment and spoke to Hayden Johnston, who's the General Manager for the Natural Environment.
I think a credit could be a great tool for a catchment group where they've got a problem, whether it might be browser species or pest control, and they want to group together to do something at a big scale that they think will be able to show improvements over time. Benefits them on the land and it benefits the wider region. So what they would do is they would collaborate, they would design a project, and under the models that we're testing at the moment, there would be a company that would verify that project, and then they would put it out to the market to see who wanted to buy it. With the pilots, we're trying to help facilitate the buyers alongside the sellers.
And what if a farmer has already done some work? Can they get biodiversity credits for those?
The model that we're looking at is about additional effort. So it would be about the new efforts on top of the existing stuff. But it would be an opportunity to find new ways to finance or fund, that new effort.
What sort of money could be gained for a landowner by using these credits?
Well, it will depend on what the credit product is. To be honest, I think in the early phases, it's not about generating new investment returns. It's really about finding a different way to fund the efforts that they're already undertaking.
Why should the private investor be involved in this? Surely this is a public good. Wouldn't it best be done by government? Who could make sure there weren't issues around greenwashing, for example?
Yeah, this talks to the point of what is the role of government in the space. Obviously, the government does provide funding to restore and enhance nature, primarily through the DOC Conservation Estate. We know, though, that there are private investors who want to support nature, and really what we're trying to do here is help provide the guardrails for a tool that they might want to.
So what sort of guardrails are we talking about?
Principles like transparency, so the buyer knows exactly what they're buying, additionality, so that what they're buying is clearly an additional benefit from what would have happened otherwise, longevity, so that the action or the outcome will occur over a longish period of time.
Are you looking at this stage at overseas examples? I know that Australia, for instance, has launched this year its nature repair market.
Yeah, we're watching the international space quite closely, particularly Australia and the nature repair market, but also looking at the UK and other models as they develop. Probably the key thing we are looking at is what are those principles that underpin the products that they are selling, because they are different. Some countries have legislated for these these products. Some countries look at them at a project scale, whereas others are trying to understand the individual outcomes for biodiversity.
Have you picked up any ideas or issues from the pilot projects that are underway so far?
One of the things I'm really keen we test is how you can do this in a way that is cost effective. We know that examples of projects that are using international verification, for example, can be quite costly, and we want to find ways to make this an available tool in New Zealand for New Zealand circumstances.
Yeah, because I imagine farmers in particular would not want another layer of red tape to deal with.
No, that's right. And at this point, what we're looking at is a voluntary market whereby farmers can group together of their own free will and volition to develop a project and package it in a way that might attract financial investment. So we're aware of that kind of duplication issue. At the moment, we're quite comfortable that we're on the right track.
And would there be some kind of central registry, do you think, for these credits?
That's something we're looking at. I think that would be a good idea, but it's sort of in the future pipeline.
But there are sceptics around this, and the Campaign for Nature says, there's real issues around biodiversity credit markets, scalability, integrity. Is it possible to create a foolproof system?
Well, we're trying to create a positive system in New Zealand, put in place some guardrails that don't currently exist, and work through the pilots to test some of those things and make sure we can provide sufficient guidance or rules as necessary for that. Yes, there are sceptics, but also I think we're approaching it in the right way. We're looking at best practice internationally and trying to bring that to New Zealand and apply it in a New Zealand context.
Hayden Johnston, General Manager for the Natural Environment at the Ministry for Environment. He was talking to Sally Round.